Bliss and Grit is an entirely listener-supported show. Supporting us is also designed to support you through keeping the episodes rolling, but also through rewards for your donation, like a Getting Started guide, a private forum, and downloadable meditations. To become a supporting member, you can visit patreon.com/bliss and grit. Hello, beautifuls. You are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're having conversations about the awakening spiritual path and what does that even mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, the beauty and the crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? Thank you for being here as a listener. We hugely appreciate it. If you want to stay up to date on all things Bliss and Grit and get a weekly digest of the resources that we are currently loving, you can go to blissandgrit.com to subscribe. And if you're wanting more in-depth support as you navigate your own path and internal process, we both see clients privately. So feel free to go to the website for more information on that as well. The last thing before we head into the conversation, we do sometimes curse. So if you are in non-swearing company, you may want to wear headphones. Okay, here we go.
Hello, Brooke.
Hey, Vanessa.
I'm so excited to see you this week.
I know, it's so fun. We get to go to Phoenix, do a little weekend workshop thing.
Plus, it's your birthday.
That's true. 45.
Whee! Wow. So nice and like round, that number. So
yeah,
perfect.
It's good. It's good.
Well, we put out a call for questions in our Patreon forum that we have for the show. You can all find information about that on our website if you're interested. But we got a few responses, some things that people were hoping we could discuss so they can get maybe a new perspective on it. And I'm going to read kind of a synopsis of it. I took a little bit out just to make it less personalized and just to cut it a little shorter for sake of effect. But also, I think it's important we say before I even read it that when we get questions like this, we feel a certain level of responsibility that's almost impossible to meet, right, Brooke? It's like we realize the heart behind the questions, and we so deeply want to be of service and support in our answer. Yet we know that nothing written on paper is ever going to reflect the depth and breadth of what a human being is going through. And so we do the best we can when we get questions like this to answer in a way that feels true for us from our experience, and also that we think may reach as many people as possible. And we may miss something, but we'll do the best we can just to, speak from our truth that's arising in the moment. Anything you want to add to that, Brooke?
No, I think that sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. So here's the question that we were presented with in a bit of a paraphrased format. Here we go. In the last couple of years, I've worked diligently to get in touch with my emotionality based on years of suppression due to childhood trauma and abuse, as well as a career that hinges on being non-reactive to everything. I've been working at allowing others to express emotion without inhibition and embracing where they are. I've also been working on allowing myself to feel love and support. I've been able to allow support or love one-on-one or in a small group. But now I keep finding two things coming up. Number one, when I do let myself feel my emotions deeply, I frequently get super overwhelmed. And even if I'm happy, I find myself diving into the ugly snort cry. So I immediately try to suppress that, even if I am not at home. Oh, I'm sorry. I try to suppress that if I'm not at home or alone. Number two, times that I am center of attention or receiving heartfelt love and support are still very uncomfortable for me in groups. Why is it so difficult to feel deep emotion in myself and from others still? And why is it difficult to receive the love my friends and family are very happy to give me? So it's a great question. And, the listener outlined at least a few different parts to it. When Brooke and I were looking at this, we realized, gosh, you could probably do an episode on either part alone.
For sure.
On some level, they are different, or we can speak about them differently. Though I think there is some commonality in terms of intimacy, connection, vulnerability, and allowance that we thought we could get at. So, you want to begin sharing your thoughts, Brooke, or,
Sure.
Should I? Go ahead if you're up for it. Let's go.
The place that I immediately go to when I hear the question is pretty somatic. That it feels like an issue of a container, meaning a body, a soma, a being, that has difficulty containing the emotion, whether it's the emotion of the other person or receptivity of something quite wonderful, love or warmth. And I know that my own recovery and healing, recovery meaning from trauma, has been a lot about the experience, the felt experience of my body. And, we could be talking about my actual physical body, right? Like go and get body work, go do movement work that opens up the actual physical container. That's true. That's been very helpful. But I'm also thinking a lot on the energy body realm, not necessarily things like chakras but more like feeling meaning sensation. And that if we've been exposed to a lot of trauma, there's a way that our container either becomes really contracted, and when we spoke with Judith Blackstone of the realization process, you and I both trained with her, she would talk about how if something is happening to you that is too much, really the only way that you can respond to that is to contract away from it and or vacate. Disappear from the body completely. And so it sets up this funny relationship that we have with our bodies, the way we inhabit them, what it feels like in there. And there can be, with trauma, quite a lot of sensation already. Actually, our episode with Jane Clapp that came out last week, she talked about, I thought it was a beautiful image that when you drop into the body, so in this case, let's say somebody's not doing necessarily somatic meditation at all, but they're at work and they're having to be a receptive, open person to somebody who is coming in with a high emotional charge. Or they're with someone they love and they're having to be receptive to somebody giving them, for example, a compliment, saying something kind. Jane painted that picture of like you just jump in the pool and the whole body gets underwater and it's like you're full, it's over full, and then you're just drowning. All you can feel is the sensation. There's nowhere else to resource because it's just tons of sensation in the body. So for me, creating a more open, adaptable, resilient container of my body, the ability to feel safe and at home in my body, was really quite a process. So this isn't going to be the kind of conversation of like, and here's how to do it. I'll talk about ways to explore that, but that is it's a process that occurs over time. So I'll speak to one of the ways, I'm sure I'll get into many more, but one of the ways that's been super helpful for me is Judith Blackstone's realization process work. And I remember it was so revelatory for me to play with where I was located with my awareness, and that much of the time I wasn't located in my body. And that if I just suddenly put everything in my body, that because I had unmetabolized traumatic charge in there, it felt like jumping into the deep end. It felt like too much, like I'm drowning. This sensation is just too much. I don't have the capacity to feel this. So if we have that charge in our bodies, and then we're forcing ourselves to be able to be a receptive container for somebody else's emotionality, or a receptive container for somebody's beautiful, kind regard, whatever it is, it's like it's too full in here already. There's too much stuff in here, and any additional charge, whether challenging or beloved, is just overwhelming. It's like it's spilling over. I remember when I was first getting in touch with this with myself, it felt like, this is going to sound melodramatic, but I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, so live with it, people. It felt like if you've ever watched like a YouTube video or something where they're filling a glass container with too much water volume, but there's some way they've set it up that there's no top for it to flow out of. So of course it cracks, right? Cracks and shatters. And I felt like that glass vessel for a long time, that anything else that was incoming, a coworker having a rough day, or somebody saying, you look gorgeous today, it was actually just more water into the glass container that did not have any room for that water volume. So back to what I was saying about Judith Blackstone's work and location, I had to learn how to do what Jane was talking about, that kind of dual awareness, right? Like, yes, if I check into my body, lots of charge in there. And I can also go to the space in the room, and Somatic Experiencing calls this resourcing. Other disciplines do as well. That we can have an awareness of what it feels like in the body, and also have some kind of safe resource. Also have some way of locating in a place that feels safe and good. So for me, to give concrete examples of what does that even mean, it's like I can be aware of the sensation, right? Maybe somebody's talking to me in a very emotional way, and I feel the charge, right, in my solar plexus. My heart is racing, and there's sensation, a lot of sensation that feels a lot like fear, anxiety, overwhelm, anger maybe. That I can be aware of that, and at the same time, be aware of the space in the room or the air on my skin, or scan my body for what is some place, anything that feels good right now. And maybe it's my feet, maybe it's my left pinky. But learning how to have this dual awareness of like, yes, there's a lot of sensation in here already, and now incoming, here comes more sensation. The way that my container didn't feel like this tiny, fragile glass container with too much water volume being poured into it, and it felt like this safe, resilient, dynamic, expansive place. That happened through a process of being able to play somatically and attentionally, meaning with my awareness, with where am I located? What is safe here right now? What feels good here right now? What's nourishing here right now? Or like, oh, look, there's this sensation. Also, there's that picture on the wall. There's that, light coming in through the window. And with Judith Blackstone's work, just to clarify that I'm not misrepresenting her work, she's talking about attuning to fundamental consciousness ultimately, right? That there is this field of being that's always here, and we can get more and more familiar with it, and it can become a friendly place that we can go to. In my experience, that is where I go to most of the time, but that is so purely experiential and so not a part of our culture that saying that can be just a little tough, as an instruction, because it's like, how do I start with that? So some simpler ones can be, right, like I feel the air on my skin, my feet feel warm, comfortable, and safe right now, or I see light coming in through the window. Those can be easier dual awareness than inhabit the body and fundamental consciousness at the same time. That's a great end game, but it's not usually a very accessible starting point.
Well, I love everything you're saying, and I want to go back to give some, maybe just context, like some psychological context to the experience. But before I kind of move backwards to go forwards again, I want to make sure we clarify some of the nuggets out of what you're saying. So, because you said a lot, and so I don't want to dull it down to a couple of sentences like I'm about to do, but one question, like one thing to clarify. So in part, or what you're saying is what you're saying, that this unprocessed emotional experience that we can have when we suppress emotions due to overwhelm in our childhood or whenever, that in part, it's like there's already too much energetic charge in the body from these unmetabolized experiences.
Yeah.
So then when you're tapping into your emotions or when you're receiving new data, be it someone else's emotions or be it love, that it's almost like it can go right away into like an overflow, like too much on the system, right? And then we're going to get to more ways we can meet this. But one of the ways that you're describing is that there's something about this dual awareness that gives the container more capacity, more spaciousness to hold this kind of intensity of sensate experience.
Yeah, and allows for a process that the best word I use for it, because it's what it feels like, it allows for this off-gassing process to happen, and that's what a lot of somatic trauma work is, things like somatic experiencing, that it's not just that you have sort of a bigger container, but still all of this charge. It's like when you are able to access safer resource points, like, oh, also there's supportive things here. Also, there's something that feels good. I can shift my awareness off of this very large sensation and go feel something else that just by the nature of doing that, it does over time. It's like a metabolic process for trauma. It does off gas. And for those who are listening to this and are like, what? Peter Levine's work, which is Somatic Experiencing, is a great place to, if you're interested in the nitty gritty of how does that even happen, he would be the go-to for that.
Awesome. Great. So I do want to go backward to go forward again. So I don't want to lose this thread because we're talking about experientially, how does one increase their capacity to receive themselves, right? Whatever is within them, and of course to receive love. And these are two really important things. And they're two painful things when we are blocked on receiving ourselves and receiving love. So I want to go back to the experiential part. Part of what came to my mind just when I read it from a more cognitive or psychological understanding was just when we got the message in our childhood, and our listener here mentioned childhood trauma and abuse, which can, of course, come in many forms. But one of the messages that was likely received at that time was, it is not safe to experience emotions. Sometimes you can get the message, it's bad to experience emotions. You can certainly get the message, it's bad to share them. I mean, we can look at the most simplistic example of this. And if a child is crying and the parent says, shut up or I'll give you something to cry about. You could have, people in your family when you're growing up or in your culture who tell you you're weak if you have emotion. And then if you've been a victim of abuse, you think weak is a really dangerous place to be. So emotion is dangerous. It opens the door for me to be perceived as a victim. You can get the message that if you were to be angry, because sometimes people have inhibition against specific emotions. Sometimes people have inhibition against emotions in general. But let's say your anger just wasn't welcome. You'd get hit if you got angry with your parent. You will just get the internal message, right? So it's almost like, to me, on like a primary coding level, and I'm making up this language, but it's like it first gets inputted as not advisable, unsafe, or dangerous, right? Like, don't do it. it's a no. And then I think the mind will jump in to try to explain it. So it'll say, well, weak people are targets, don't be weak, or emotions are for suckers, or only soft people feel that. And then we'll go in and we'll have this kind of cognitive process, and a belief system will get accepted or created. Maybe someone gave it to us and we accepted it, or we created it. Well, part of what's interesting about understanding that is because the unraveling, as I've experienced it, I agree, the somatic piece is huge. And seeing the belief systems that you may have stored around it can be so helpful to the continued unraveling, right? Because it's almost like if in your coding, you get this message like to have emotions equals you're weak. And if you're weak, you're attacked. Mm-hmm. Well, then, of course, you'll suppress it in other people. Isn't it weird? In a way, you're even kind of protecting them, if that's the case. Or you can just think it's taboo, and you're suppressing it in yourself. And so every time you go to open up, it's triggering this old belief system that says, great, you're opening up. Now you're going to be a victim of abuse. So it's nice to look at the belief systems. And if we look at it just from a more fundamental level, before we even talk about belief or cognition, when we've been exposed to abuse and suppression and all of these different types of things, we just get the primary message that vulnerability is dangerous.
For sure.
And intimacy happens as we connect through our emotions, right? Intimacy is an incredibly vulnerable feeling state for the human. I think it's because our heart is open. I mean, I'm not sure, but it's like, why is intimacy so vulnerable? Why is being enjoyed vulnerable? Why is receiving vulnerable? I think on one level, it could be because our heart starts to open. That's the precious part of ourselves. If we've been abused or mistreated, we can get the message that you really better protect that precious part of ourselves. So we just can get this idea, kind of generalized idea, vulnerability is unsafe. And then, of course, we develop further beliefs about it, what it means, who we can be with, who we can't, what it means about us, what our identity is. And then, of course, our nervous system can become dysregulated anytime we're perceiving a circumstance of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And what I keep visualizing, because you were talking about being open-hearted and how that is this sensation of being open, being vulnerable. And, I just remember a time where, because the way that I tend to defend is by contracting. I sort of put on an armor suit, and I'm psychologically well, fine, then I'm just fine on my own kind of orientation. So it's like this kind of wall off, shut down, like I'm fine on my own is the narrative and the somatic behavior of walling off. And so as my body, apparently I'm in a somatic mood today, as my body kept opening, and particularly I remember doing a heart opening Dharma Ocean program before we even went to meditating with the body, at home alone, no support, total armored person. And I'm somatically working on melting my heart. It was really scary. It was what made me realize okay, I need support to go through this process. Because any softening of the heart was like, oh my God, I'm so vulnerable to attack. And then as it went on and on and on, and that softening just became more embodied and more thorough and depthful, I realized that actually the safest thing in the world is to know you're safe at the same time that you're undefended. So the body becomes undefended. The psyche understands through gradually and safely reality testing that it's okay, right? And then we get to have different kinds of experiences where we can step into a little bit, right? Vulnerability. Does it mean that I get attacked? It has in the past. It might in the future, right? So we're not painting some narrative like if you get somatically open, you only attract amazing people. But for example, I think about my coaching work. I know that me at the beginning of my Rolfing career, I wouldn't have been able to do that because I would have taken it on so much. And before I became a Rolfer, I worked in human services and I was a case manager for adults who had developmental disabilities and mental illness. Oh my God, I burnt out so hard on that job in 2 years because I just took it all on, and any kind of vulnerability just felt like this kind of flaying to me. And now I can be with people. In fact, today, I thought it was really interesting. This isn't a client story, but I was in a talk. One of the mothers at the school where my son is went to the border and was doing work with asylum seekers and just telling heart-wrenching stories about encountering, 15-year-olds hiding in the desert, dying of dehydration. It was heart-wrenching. And the things how this has become a business for the coyotes who get paid to take people across the border, and then they're selling people. And I'm going to say a lot of triggering things, so I'm not going to keep going, but you get the idea. Heart-wrenching, hard stuff. And she's talking just to the parents so that we can kind of figure out as a community, how can we keep some of this work going and help. And I remember having a moment where I kind of took stock of myself and I was like, wow, like I'm really engaged with this. I'm so grateful to the woman who did the work and is bringing it back to the community. It's heart-wrenching. So it's not that I don't feel the heart-wrenching nature of it, but I felt wide open in my body. I felt grateful that I'm in a place where this can just sort of show up on my doorstep. And I felt capable, like, oh, because I have developed the fitness, the capacity for this through my own healing work, great. Like now I can meet it without it feeling like it's going to kill me to meet it. It would have felt like it was going to kill me not that long ago. So it was this really beautiful moment, but that wasn't a push the button, have capacity kind of process, so we can be really tender with ourselves that it's okay if we're not there yet. It's okay.
Gosh, I want to push that button.
I want the button.
I want to push that.
I want the button for me. I want the button for all of us. And it's okay that it doesn't exist, that we can feel terrified about vulnerability for sure.
Yeah, it's difficult that it doesn't exist. As you were saying, it's like if we hold an image of possibility, right? What you were describing is a possibility. It's a potentiality for everyone. Mm-hmm. Everyone can get there. And we can see in that possibility that in a way, it's the more open and undefended we are, the more it moves through us in this kind of like easy to metabolize sort of sense. It's almost like the more guarded and anticipatory we are for the moment, the more difficult it is to sit with and digest the energies and emotions that may be coming through. But God, I remember, okay, so if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you probably already know this, but just in case you were new. So I grew up in one of those stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about houses. I feel like that was sadly fairly common in the 70s because a lot of people get that, right?
Yeah. That was like a step up from the 50s, right?
Yeah,
really just beating your kids with a belt or a paddle.
Exactly, because they cried and you beat them. At least they gave you a warning. I mean, I know it's not funny, but to Brooke and I,
we're really twisted souls.
Yeah, we find the lightness in our own lives, and so. Okay, so I grew up in that kind of a experience and you get the message. I mean, kids, gosh, we are pretty hopeful. I mean, we'll try to have emotions solidly at least a handful of times of getting that kind of feedback, that usually it takes a while for people to give up or the situation has to be extreme enough. But, eventually I got the message. And what was happening in my household was, and I really love my parents dearly, and I see this through a whole new lens now, but let me just collapse it into this example of how I felt as I was healing. My dad was the more violent, aggressive, angry one. My mom was the more passive. I see she is very not passive now. My mom's actually quite a little feisty, strong firecracker of a woman, but my perception was she was passive and she was receiving a lot of aggressive anger coming her way. And then I was a kid. Kids by nature are vulnerable. And I was receiving a lot of aggression coming my way. So then the message I got is, okay, well, Vanessa, you have two choices. You're either the passive, emotional, vulnerable one, who then is more prone to getting abused and to people dominating you and having control over you, or you're the less emotional. My dad was rageful, but other than that was not big on a huge range of emotional expression. He did laugh and love, but he didn't feel things like sadness or grief, or at least share them. So I got the message like, okay, here's your two choices. You either shut it all down and then you're more likely to be in control, you're more likely to be powerful, or you model this other way where you're more likely to be dominated and diminished and have aggression thrown at you. Now, this is very simple, but this is what young people's minds do. They collapse things into dualism and binary. And it's like, well, here's my two choices. So I decided, good idea, to shut down my emotions. I mean, it's a joke because I was never even good at it. That's the funny part. And it's a joke because, of course, that's so not where I am now. But it was what I thought was like my best viable option. And I think that's part of what happens is we're healing childhood conditioning, right? Because, I'm sure to our listener who wrote us this lovely question, her adult consciousness knows she's safe to open up to these people, right? To these people, the ones she wants to open up to.
Yeah, to receive love. Sure.
Yeah, and she's safe enough to receive love from these people. We don't even have to globalize and say everyone, because that's not a really intelligent way to hold this. But these people, the adult mind knows the conditioning that is showing up in the body, the conditioning that's showing up in thought patterns, like don't ugly cry in front of someone, or these kinds of things, they were formed by that dualistic, binary-oriented childhood mind. And it was so simple. It's like, well, no emotion equals strength and power. Emotion equals weakness. Emotion equals burden. My family was so burdened. If I was to be emotional, it was one more burden, right? We just formed these ideas. Well, I walked around in the world after that feeling like, and I've said this on the show before, and it's such an embarrassing thing to admit, but this was how it felt to me. I wanted to punch people if they seemed too weak. Like it was this visceral energy where weakness, which is emotion. It wasn't like, oh, I'm trying to punch the skinny, brittle kid. It was like people who were showing, really, I should say men. It was really more men, but it was like people who were showing a lot of emotion. I'm like, no, that's weak. And inside I wanted to shape them up, get stronger. What the hell? I mean, that's so not in accord with the being that I am. But I had to deeply look at what were the patterns I had, right? The internal levels of capacity. Part of what you described earlier, Brooke, was probably what was happening that I didn't understand consciously, right? They were feeling an emotion, which was evoking an emotion in me. And I was like, this has all got to stop, right? So I wanted to make it stop at all costs. And then also I had these narratives that were saying, this is bad. This is taboo. Everyone make this stop now or else. And I had to kind of come at it from all levels, the somatic level, the inquiry level, to start to deconstruct all of these different patterns that were showing up, energy, physical, and in my thought stream that kept it looping where I thought emotions were a bad thing to have. They made you weak.
Yeah. I'm also thinking about how life gives us repeating circumstances.
Bless life.
So that we can entertain the possibility of meeting it in a different way when it comes around and we're at a different level of consciousness. So, in the beginning of the question, she wrote, I grew up in an abusive household where I had to shut down all emotion. P.S. Now I'm in a job where a part of my job function is to keep emotions on lockdown, more or less. I'm paraphrasing poorly, I'm sure. So no problem. Like, we all have repeating stuff. In some ways, I like to think of it as life loves us so much that it's being really thorough with us in how often it hands us an opportunity for our total freedom, which is way better than I screwed up, or I'm doing it again, or, oh shit, it's going to go on forever and ever. You know, these patterns are going to keep repeating, whatever the way we would approach it. So if we think of it as without jumping to ideas of what that means, because the mind very quickly is like, are they going to say I have to quit my job? And then the problems with that, that's my livelihood, or that's crazy. And we're not jumping into any kind of future scenario. It's just saying, like, interesting. Can we get a little curious of, like, that's so interesting. Repeating pattern. For me, I'm at the point, because patterns still repeat, of course, where I'm like, when I catch a repeating pattern, I'm like, so interesting. This looks like a match to this. It's like playing a card matching game, but I get to do it at a different level of awareness. So, in this case, I would just say without this being about action plans, you have to, you should, you shouldn't, just entertain the possibility, like, I have to have a job that mirrors what was required of me in my upbringing, where I have to really keep emotions on lockdown. Is that absolutely true? And I remember going through this in my Rolfing practice, because I started practicing 20 years ago. Oh my God, I was fawn personified. It was just like, people can lay down on a table and I take care of them. And then I act in ways where I really hope they just like me. You know, like, people would say thank you at the end of a session. It would be like, thank you. Like, I was that person. I couldn't even say, you're welcome. Now I'm just like, you're welcome. But back then, just saying you're welcome felt like, unavailable or not nice. So I'm still practicing and Rolfing 20 years later. It's not that I needed to chuck that, but my way of being with my clients is so different, just because I got to the point where I got to keep entertaining the possibility. Do I really need my clients to think I'm the nicest, most selfless person in the whole wide world? Or is that just what I thought I needed to do growing up in order to get love in an alcoholic family structure? Like, maybe that doesn't need to keep playing out, because it feels oppressive. It feels oppressive when someone says thank you at the end of a session. I go, oh no, thank you. I just love my work so much. And now it's thank you. And it's, oh, you're welcome. So good to see you. I'm doing the exact same thing, but one feels oppressive and one feels just like a nice exchange. So,
sure. And since perception creates reality, I mean, part of what you're saying is, you could have a repeating cycle where you're in a relationship or in a job that looks and feels just like your family of origin, or not just like, but a reflection of. And also, it's possible that you're projecting onto the circumstance the same conditions with which you suffered with earlier as a requirement. And maybe it's not true that you have to be, non-reactive to everything.
Right. Maybe there's some flexibility there. And sometimes I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in others. It's time for something to go, right? It's time for a career change, a relationship change, but we don't need to predict that it's going to be something super drastic. We just want to be able to be playful with it, where we're entertaining the possibility. Is it true? Is it totally true that I need to have so much non-reactivity running through my life, that it's in work, it's in, home, wherever else it might show up?
Yeah, for me, it's almost like, unless that job situation, and now we're talking about an imaginary one, not our dear listener's job situation.
Because we don't get to talk with you, dear listener, and get the actual details. So just to be clear, we're not projecting this is what we're talking
assume. About this job that we're now making up in our heads. When it comes to anyone's job situation, in this case, where they're experiencing this push-pull, like, can I be myself here? Right. And the assumption is I cannot, whatever that means to them. I really, unless the job is a pressure cooker, really inviting you out the door because your health is declining, or, there's some real tangible pressurizing item, I almost always assume come from the inside first, because as we can open up capacity, we regain clarity, we regain the ability to see without projecting the past onto the present. And we don't know what'll open up, right? Like I've been with you through your Rolfing journey, and moments where it felt so hard, and moments then all of a sudden it's transformed into ease and grace and beauty. Mm-hmm. Same for me and working with clients. I had so many moments years back where it was like, I just was in that typical, we've heard it before, empath dilemma, where it's like, it's too much, the suffering, I can't, I'm feeling it. It's like, it's affecting me and I'm tired. And then something happened on the inside. There was some level of transformation. And then that doesn't feel true at all anymore. Mm-hmm. So, it's nice that if life's not providing a pressure cooker that's really signaling you, like, make a change. Like if you're in an abusive relationship, you just do that. Make the change. Drug addiction, do the best you can, make the change. Like if there's a pressure on you. But otherwise, it's nice to see what happens as some of these obscurations to clarity can be removed, or as your container can be expanded, as you have new tools and new capacities and new awarenesses. Like the same situation can oftentimes look really different if you're open to it looking really different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I want to make sure that before we end the episode that we speak a little directly to capacity for joy, because this is one of my pet favorite things, because it has not been my strong suit. My personality conditioning and structure was around the good ones are the ones who suffer. And if we have a trauma background, it can be really hard to have capacity for joy or even just receptive to love. In the longer version of the question, which we didn't read on air, the listener gave an example of a group of women playing with this by giving each other a compliment and then just receiving the compliment. And the analogy the listener gave in the question was that it was like watching people trying to solve a Rubik's Cube to receive a compliment. And I really get that. And things like receiving a compliment, really sitting with it and absorbing it, if it feels like too big a step, and it can sometimes be too big a step, that we can create better maps in our awareness, put out the spidey senses for goodness in more subtle ways. And I do like to do this through sensation first, right? We can turn our awareness to what feels nourishing. I use this with my clients all the time. What feels nourishing here right now? What's anything? Is it the temperature of my hands? Is it the cold glass of water I'm drinking from? But that can be an inquiry. And I have my clients write this on Post-it notes and put it around their house, not like serial killer style, but just a few here and there, or put it in your wallet. So when you open it, you see it, so that you can prompt yourself, because our brain moves fast and it moves along habitual paths. So it's not going to put a map out, put out the spidey senses for what feels good. What can I receive that's nourishing right now? So we need to give it a big speed bump and a redirect. So we can do it through sensation. We can do it through awareness practices like that. And then we can up level it to, if something good happens, if someone says, "Oh, you look gorgeous today," or, your partner says, "I can't wait for date night. You've been in my mind all day." Something really lovely happens, that you then, with a little more capacity, right, take that moment. I like to take those moments and pause and actually with my hands do the movement of like I'm bringing it up towards myself, almost like you were sort of putting lotion on yourself or like just moving it up towards my heart, hands on the heart. This, what's the word I'm looking for? Gathering in towards myself. And pause with that moment, because if we've grown up with a lot of trauma or scarcity stuff or things like that, it's very hard to catch the moments. And it's also very hard to receive the moments. It feels very uncomfortable. And I've just found that has been a practice. It's a real practice that I had to get and continue to be devoted to. Of like, goodness is arising. Simple things. Like if I had been stressed out about money, when a client hands me a check, I just take a moment, I look at the check, and I do the energy gathering towards the heart kind of movement. Like, take a pause, take a beat, really take in this lovely thing that's right here.
Sure. Imagine the mixed messages we can get around love. You could have someone who says they love you, but then they hit you. You could have someone who says they love you, but then they emotionally abandon you, or they love you, but they never see you. They ignore you, right? So we get so many mixed messages around love that it can begin to feel, we can become hyper vigilant towards receiving, right? We can come defended against, and we can get so many mixed messages around attention.
Yeah,
being
for sure.
the center of attention, right? Like, well, what happened in our life earlier when we got attention? Did that seem to go well for us? Because if not, the body's going to hold that memory, or the belief systems are going to register that experience. And we're going to say, ugh, you know, for me, my house was fairly loving, actually. There was a lot of love. There just was a lot of anger and projection and codependency and yada, yada. I could probably keep going, but it was still a house with love in it. Yet I remember doing this women's group. I was in Miami. Maybe this was like 5 years ago or something. And the instructor had women form groups of 5 or 6. And one woman would get on the floor, and the other women would each take a limb in the head and kind of hold her and gently massage her. It sounds like it would feel dissonant having 5 women do that, but actually it felt really lovely. And your job was to lay down and receive, and then watch what came through your mind as you were receiving. And this was a women's circle that was at a yoga school, and so a lot of the people there were yogis and yoga teachers specifically. It was like a kind of high level teacher. And almost all of them felt more comfortable giving than receiving. I mean, giving is the less vulnerable position, P.S., than receiving, unless you're giving of your heart, you know, giving of your love, right? But action-wise. So it can be anything from that level of difficulty to, I don't know if you ever would have read this. Did you ever read the book by Anna Forrest?
No, but I know the book. Yeah.
And I forget what it was called, but it was about her own life story, and I had read it, and it's pretty impactful. If I'm not misremembering, Anna had like cult level abuse. I mean, just, you know, some of the worst stuff we can imagine kind of abuse. And she said that for her, she had to begin the practice of giving and receiving love with an animal.
Yeah. I did it with a tree begin. As a child and adolescent. I had a specific tree.
Yeah. Yep. You know me, I've always felt safer with trees, right? And Judith cleared up that it was because I didn't feel safe with people. But it's like, oh, I can hold this tree and I can let this tree support me. Anna had the ability to work with horses. And so that was the way she did it. I think what I'm trying to present is this is not a moment to judge what we should be capable of or what we could be capable of. A very intelligent, loving guide starts with wherever you are, and you are the guide for yourself, perhaps, or maybe you have a support system, someone who's a guide for you, but they're honest about where you are because they know the truth is that within you lies wholeness, lies unbrokenness, lies beauty, lies sacredness, lies the whole universe. So then it doesn't matter where you are today. Yes, it hurts. Yes, we can wish to be somewhere else, but we just start there because we trust that we always can heal. There is always potential, always possibility. That's what we're here for and we're designed for. So then we just start wherever we are, because depending on you, your life, your background, your body, your genetics, your lineage, the color of your skin, your socioeconomic group, who you have exposure to, who you don't, right? Like what counselors you've had or not, like all of these things factor in uniquely to wherever you are in that given moment in terms of expressing yourself in front of people, in terms of letting yourself be held in your emotion, and in terms of feeling open to receiving from life or from others. And so I know we say this all the time, but I hope you can receive the transmission of our love when we say, please, please don't judge where you're at, love where you're at, understand where you're at, and know that wherever you're starting from on this particular journey of emotional reclamation, self-expression, and receiving of love and joy, you can get to a whole and healthy experience of yourself there. So just start with where you're at.
Yeah. And that we have such a strong value on doing these things really quickly. And from the point of view when you're feeling pain, right, I get it. I really understand the desire to go quickly. But that can also sometimes just be hitching a ride on, I should be different. I should be more capable of X, Y, or Z. And so I'm not advocating going slow like it has to be a slog, but going slow in the sense of just being tender. Like you were just saying, Vanessa, just you are where you are. Okay. Like how very human of you. We're all people that are carrying different kinds of, loads, and we can be really tender with ourselves. That is what makes things metabolize more easily, not the I'm going to hurry up and get over there to be the one who's, I don't know, in the middle of Mardi Gras receiving like all that energy. That doesn't need to be what we
up
jump
on
right
stage
to.
with everybody clapping for me.
Right. Like we take the steps that we take in the way that makes sense, and that's okay.
I just had 2 friends get married, and just the idea that everybody was going to be like looking at them like for some extended period of time was like, just cringeworthy, right? And all they could just do the best they could, breathe and accept and receive. It's really, it's just really amazing when you get into the rabbit hole of human conditioning and human transformation, because you're like, this is what we all want so deeply. That's why it hurts. That's why we try to rush it. Like what we want so deeply is to be at one with ourselves and others. We want to be home. We want to be loved and happy and expressive as needed and welcoming to others as needed. And it's just so wild when you realize how difficult that can be. Like the very things that we just most simply want and crave and yearn for. And then we have, all sorts of mental, emotional, physical, and energetic conditioning that are like, nope. Yep. Not going there.
It is humbling for sure. Thank you so much for being a part of our community and for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. That is also where you can subscribe to get our weekly digest of what we're up to and other resources that we're currently finding helpful. If you're wanting more support, blissandgrit.com also has more information on our private coaching practices. We're so grateful for the reviews you've written, for the membership support that so many of you have provided at Patreon, and for all the notes that you send. Thank you. We'll be back next week.